Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to our Friday conversations. We have conversations here on Friday about all kinds of topics related to quantum human design. So give me just a second here while I make sure I call everybody in to this conversation. And I'm going to do my best to see your comments. It's a little bit tricky in this format. Supposedly there's a button I can toggle somewhere that lets me see your comments, but I haven't found that button yet. So, which feels like that's kind of at least my experience in modern life, right? I haven't found that button yet. So, good morning. Good morning. It's so good to have you here. We're going to have a really interesting conversation about power and empowerment. And in that conversation, I want to give you some nuggets, if you will, some things to think about and contemplate in the context of how you can feel and become more empowered. So let's start this morning. By exploring the question. And this might be a little tricky because I don't know if I can see all of your comments, but I'm going to do my best. Let's start this morning by, here's a button. Let me see if that's the button to push. Let's start this morning by exploring the question, what is your definition of power? What does it mean to be and or to feel powerful? So just take a second to post your answer in there. And I know that might be a bigger conversation than a one-liner or a couple lines to, in comments that we make on Facebook. But I want you to really start thinking about it because power is so important, and feeling empowered is so important that we literally go through two distinctly different developmental phases. Oh, sorry, I didn't know that would do that. We go through two distinctly developmental phases when we're toddlers, like when we hit the terrible twos, right? And when we're adolescents, that are all about learning how to become personally empowered, appropriately empowered, how to differentiate ourselves and be powerful in the world. And so little children learn this first by learning that very powerful and magical word that drives parents crazy sometimes, right? They learn how to say no, right? Your toddler is going to say no. That's actually one of the very first words that most kids learn. And that word is so important because not only is it, of course, a very important word for terms of setting boundaries and being able to clarify what you want, it's also a very powerful word. Being able to say no to something you don't want to do, or you don't want to eat, or you don't want to wear, or someplace where you don't want to go is part of feeling powerful, right? The second phase that we go through, adolescence, has such an important role for us developmentally, and a lot of us don't get to master this challenge appropriately. And so what happens is we grow up into adulthood not having learned how to become appropriately powerful, and we live out power dramas in our relationships or with our work. When we go out and experience the world, we're reacting because we feel powerless. Okay, so the thing that we learn to say, and the goal of power during adolescence, is really to distinguish ourselves as being separate, sovereign individuals. And that sovereignty comes first by oftentimes rebelling against our parents, or rebelling against the school, or rebelling against those things we're told, we don't want to do as teenagers, and sometimes engaging in inappropriate behaviors as a form of rebellion. But ultimately, that second phase of development is about teaching us to know ourselves, and to know ourselves as separate from all of our conditioning fields, separate from our families, separate from who we are. We come back, we actually kind of unify that journey or complete that journey when we get to be about 30 or 40. Then we move back into, being powerful in the context of our relationships, right? So Dina Murray says, or Heather says, being my authentic self is a definition of power. Dina Murray says, I feel powerful when I don't allow the external world to affect my vibration. You get an A+ this morning, Dina. Good job. Tina says, able to stand in my truth. Absolutely. Rebecca says, oh, hey, Rebecca, good morning. I love channeling my inner toddler. Me too, although it's not always pretty. Power is connected to our freedom to choose. Absolutely. Great comments about the definition of power. Now, I think that when it feels like things are falling apart, when we go through incredibly traumatic experiences that are really literally physically beyond our control, like when we experience climate disasters like we had in the past year with Hurricane Helene and other hurricanes in Florida and fires in LA, external circumstances or the loss of a child, right? Those kinds of circumstances can make us feel really powerless over our lives. And I want to be really mindful that as we start this conversation, that if you have experienced any of these events in your life, that reclaiming your power over that situation is something that takes time. And so as we have this conversation, please know that I'm not being glib and I'm definitely not saying, click your heels together 3 times, change your mindset, and poof, you're going to feel better. Sometimes when we go through disruptive experiences that make us feel disempowered, and that's the norm right now in the celestial weather, right? Is we're in a massive collective disruptive cycle that you don't always feel empowered in the moment, and that's okay. That's okay. I want you to all be gentle and sweet with yourselves, because you can't force yourself into power, or you can't force yourself to feel powerful. And certainly you can't force yourself to feel any particular way if you haven't completed the stages of grief first. And in the stages of grief, part of what's happening is you're resolving your sense of powerlessness over an event that you felt like you had no control over. And control is not power. Okay? I want to be really clear. Control oftentimes is a shadow element of power. And the highest expression of control is self-regulation. And I want to also be really clear as we start this conversation, when I'm talking about self-regulation, I am definitely not talking about bypassing. It is also sometimes really appropriate to be, I'm going to say a bad word I don't say very often, to be pissed off, right? To feel angry and to feel like your boundaries or parts of your life have been violated. It is also okay to feel that way, because that's fuel for learning how to become powerful and even learning how to stand your ground and speak your truth. Some of the things that you all said in the chat, so that you can take a stand and create change sometimes in the face of something that feels violating or something that feels very out of alignment with what is the truth of your heart. So hold true to those two. So when we talk about power, or when I talk about power, I'll say, I like to think about power in the context of the space that lives between stimulus and response. And I go back to this definition a lot. This definition comes from Viktor Frankl. This is a definition that comes from his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is kind of an autobiography, but also an incredibly inspiring read. Viktor Frankl, for those of you who don't know, was a Holocaust survivor who, for whatever reason, in the brilliance that was the story of Viktor Frankl, made a decision in the midst of horrible torture and loss as a Holocaust prisoner, decided that nobody was going to take control over his inner landscape and his capacity to choose internally how he was going to experience every day. And when he emerged from the Holocaust, he spent his life teaching about purpose, and that all people have a purpose in the world to fulfill, and that when you find that purpose, that becomes a source of your power. And my bestie calling me, one of the things that he talked about a lot was the only thing we have total control, or that we're able to regulate, is the space between stimulus and response. No one can take that away from you unless you choose to allow them to take that away from you. Now, that's a very simple explanation of power, but when we look at biology and physiology and neuroscience and all of the huge advances that we've made, not only in neuroscience, but also in understanding the genetic role and the ancestral lineage that lives in our genetics, and the genetic role that reactivity plays, right? That a lot of what we react to, or a lot of what we're living out in that space between stimulus and response, comes not only from our own lived experiences, but also from our ancestral lineage. So think about this for a minute. If we want to take back control over that space between stimulus and response, part of what we have to do is we have to rewire our brains, because 95% of what's going on in your life when you're acting out in the world, 95% of what's going on is old patterns rooted in your brain. And those patterns are sourced from not only your lived experience, but also your ancestral lineage. So you're already born with patterns in you that come from events that happened before you even got here. And as you go through life and you experience energy, this is where your human design chart becomes such a great tool for helping you interpret how do you react in certain spaces and certain energies, and your lived experiences. The combination of your lived experiences, your energy, your ancestral lineage, all of this creates this somewhat unconscious matrix that it comprises your identity and your hardwiring in your brain that's running the show when you make a decision. And when we are running on patterns, which is really what it is, because the brain is remarkably efficient when it comes to making decisions, right? That when we're running on patterns, well, think about, what is a pattern? A pattern is something that repeats itself again and again and again and again, right? And so every time we go through a pattern cycle, we're reacting, right? We're reacting out the same pattern again and again and again and again. Now, the good news is that 5% of your being is conscious and aware and actually has the capacity to deliberately and intentionally choose, right? 5% of you, 5% of who you perceive yourself to be, 5% of your being is conscious. And actually that 5% can expand with practice and with awareness, okay? So that 5%, you can take back control over that 5%, and ultimately that 5% can be the being that's running the show. And the unconscious patterns and that conditioning can lose some of its power. And of course, the more you are living from that 5% of your identity, the more you're in control, if you will, or you're able to regulate yourself in that space between stimulus and response. Now, if you have not registered for my masterclass series that starts on February the 10th, this is a 5-day masterclass series that I'm going to be teaching. We're going to be talking all week long about how do you take back control over that space between stimulus and response. And we're going to be looking at human design or quantum human design and that space between stimulus and response, and specifically looking at it in the context of work and the workplace and what's evolving and shifting and changing in the workplace, and how do we become empowered in the workplace and in how we work in the world. We're going to be talking about empowerment and that space between stimulus and response, and how you can take back control of that space so that you can activate optimal wellness on a quantum level. And we're going to be talking about how do you get into that space, get a hold of that 5%, and shift your wiring towards abundance and creative expansion. If you want to join me, if you have not registered yet and you want to join me for that series, I'll post the link to that series below, or Jamila will post the link to that series below. Get signed up. You're going to want to watch what we're going to talk about, because I'm going to be bringing in some really powerful brand new science and, of course, quantum human design, and give you some really deep insights into how can you expand your control over that space between stimulus and response. Now, let's talk about, and I did this on Tuesday a little bit. I went off the rails. I'm back, but I'm probably still going to go off the rails. Let's talk about where power lives in the chart, and let's talk about it in the context of the collective definition of power. Because collectively, when we talk about being powerful, our cultural definition, our collective definition, even our ancestral definition is probably a little bit different than some of the definitions of power y'all posted below, okay? You all are talking about feeling powerful when I can express myself. My power apparently is in my inner Mars, says Jamila. And as Erin said, the power is your freedom to choose. Well, historically, that's not how we define power, right? And we've been playing with this curriculum about power for hundreds of years. And certainly I would say the reclamation of our sense of power and our collective job of reclaiming our sense of power has been part of the function of the curriculum that the planets have been playing out for us literally for the last 400 years. Since the beginning of the scientific revolution, which is actually more like 600 years ago, we've been thinking about power. We've been exploring and experimenting with the idea of power. And part of it started with a rebellion against the king and a rebellion against the church in the Western world, right? Science emerged as a system because a lot of heretics got together and said, you know what, I think the king is cuckoo, and I think the church is making stuff up, and I don't want to follow the church or the king anymore. Let's figure out how the world works, actually. Let's do some science, let's experiment, let's observe. Let's see how the world really works. And if we can understand how the world really works, then the church or the king can't feed us lies, and we can take back control over how we create in the world. This is a journey we've been on for 600 years, right? And it's been a very interesting journey, and certainly a journey that's taken some interesting twists and turns in the plot outline since the emergence of quantum physics, which basically says you have way more control and power than what you think. And that actually your expectations and the stories you tell about who you are and how you are and the meanings you have about archetypes, base ideas, are influencing how you experience the world. It's giving you power to choose more consciously and transcend your ancestral lineage, transcend your lived experiences, transcend the limitations that you've been told by your life, and create beyond what you can even imagine, right? That's really the promise of quantum physics. And honestly, I think the promise of the next 400 years of our soul curriculum given to us by the planets. Now, if we go back to the human design chart, and as I talk about this, certainly if you have these things colored in your chart, they will impact you deeply. These will be part of a theme that you are designed to learn about and explore and study over the arc of your entire life. This is part of your personal soul curriculum. If you don't have these things colored in your chart, it doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're here to learn about this theme through your relationships, through your interactions with the world. So some of you have an internal curriculum that you're going to be playing with over your whole life. And some of you have a curriculum that's based on learning from your experiences in the world through relationships and through your outer world. But we all have it. We all have all the charts. So don't tell me I don't have this in my chart. You have it. It's either going to be colored in, and if it is, it's consistent and part of your soul curriculum. And if it's open, it's also part of your soul curriculum, but you're going to be experiencing it in a variety of different ways through your relationships and through your interactions in the world. Now, collectively, culturally, we have a tendency to think that power is sort of he with the most toys wins, right? We think power is about taking, seizing, hoarding, having more than everybody else, right? We think that power comes with guns and weapons and taking control, right? Or sometimes those weapons in our personal lives, can be abuse, right? Or somebody who violates our boundaries and tries to control our choices and our self-expression. These are culturally accepted definitions of power, which are different, by the way, than the definition of leadership, which is the highest expression of power in the chart. So the highest potential expression of power in the chart, and I want to set this as a standard. If we look at the chart as the overall story of what is possible for human beings, we see that the most powerful energy in the chart lives in the channel 731. That is the channel that in traditional human design is called the channel of the alpha. In quantum human design, it's the channel of democratic leadership. That channel goes from the G center, the heart. It goes from the heart to the throat. It's on the left-hand side of the G center, connecting to the throat center. So the most powerful form of leadership comes from the heart. And I also want to point out to you that the heart center, or that G center, is not a motor. It's not a motor. It's a center that calibrates how we move in the world, what we attract in the world, how we be in the world. It is the center for love and direction, right? So let's start first as a new standard of power is that we be aligned with our authentic self and we lead together based on what we all want, right? Not just what I want or you want, but we work collaboratively to engineer a unified direction based on the fulfillment of the needs of the whole. That's power. That's power, that's influence, that's collaboration, that's leadership, okay? Leadership comes from the heart. Now, the potential for leadership comes from another source, another part of the heart. So if we go back to the 7 centers of the Hindu chakra system, we know that the G center, that's the heart or the diamond in the middle of the chart, depending on your chart software, and the will center, that's the little triangle to the right of the G center in the chart, that both of those centers actually come from the heart chakra. So they're both technically heart. One is high heart and higher purpose, that's the G center, and one is, I don't want to call it low heart, but one is ego, your personal differentiation from the whole, right? So in theory, your ego is here to serve your higher purpose, right? Your differentiated self, who you are, is here to serve a higher purpose. And that higher purpose isn't just about you, it's a collective purpose. It's a unified purpose. It's a human purpose and a spiritual purpose. Now, the will center is also part of the heart. And when we look at traditionally how we define power, we traditionally define power through the wills, the low or the shadow expressions of the will. And in particular, we say power gets expressed through the 2145, this channel that connects the will center, that little triangle, to the throat center. And it terminates in a gate, the gate 45, that in traditional human design we call the gate of the king or the queen. Right? That's power, right? We walk in and we say, make it so, and then we have power, right? And everybody's scrambling to fulfill it. That's the theoretical story, right, of the gate 45. Now, this same energy is energy that is actually, in its highest expression, energy that is about sharing, right? If we look at the will center, the purpose of the will center is to create resources on a material plane. We do the work of the world and we translate energetic value into material value. And that value is ours to share with each other. And so that value right now, still in the world, is oftentimes defined as money and goods, right? It's the, I shouldn't start talking about handbags. I don't know anything about handbags. I always forget carrying a purse. I'm like a backpack kind of gal. Sometimes I'm a grocery bag kind of a gal, if I'm honest. I never remember purses, but I know some people are really into purses and handbags, and it's a thing, like it's a status thing, right? I got this Berkey bag, I think is what it's called, right? And it's like multiple thousands of dollars. Honey, if I bought a $1,000 bag, I would lose it within 24 hours. Anyway, bottom line is, we define value oftentimes materialistically, and oftentimes we measure it with numbers. And in particular, when we're talking about money, we're measuring value with numbers that measure how much money we have. And that is how we define whether we have power or not. In fact, we have we have things we say, right? We say money is power. Well, in our world right now, it is, right? It is. And that's the shadow, by the way, of that energy. And it's an energy that's under a lot of evolutionary pressure right now. So yes, in the past, we have defined power as being money, but really power is not money. Power is time, energy, information, resources, integrity, wholeness, vitality. These are the actual higher expressions, the higher manifestations of power. And ultimately, as we continue to evolve, what we see in the stars, if you will, or from the planets, is that we are evolving towards a new definition of value. And that new definition of value, we've actually been working it for the last 100, 120 years. That new definition of value is well-being. When we are well, we have a lot of power, right? And if any of you have ever experienced not being well, especially on a physical level, when we are not well, we can feel very powerless, right? And that wellness becomes the source of power. Now, wellness comes from sustainability, meaning we're no longer in boom and bust cycles of energy, right? We are valuing ourselves enough to sustain ourselves, to be able to keep our energy at a regulated level so we're not crashing and burning, right? We are living our power by being sustainable. And that definition translates out into the real world, right? We can't create sustainability on the planet if we ourselves are not sustainable first. If you want an example, think about, I don't know where you all might live. I don't have this here because I live in a teeny tiny town in the middle of Wisconsin, but if you go to the big city and you are tired at the end of the day and you're hungry, you just pick up the phone and you call Grubhub, or you make an online order for Grubhub or Instacart or some quick place that's going to come and deliver food to you. And oftentimes that food comes in styrofoam containers with plastic silverware in a plastic bag, or some other kind of plastic container, right? And somebody had to get in their car and drive it to you. You're not making a sustainable environmental choice, right? Because you're burned out and you're tired at the end of the day. We don't make good choices when we're tired. So what the chart shows us is that a source of power is sustainability, being in a state of wellness. But in the shadow of this energy, and again, this is the cultural definition, we're powerful when we have more toys, more stuff, more money. That gives us control. And we can use that control to overpower others, right? That's one place where power lives in the chart. The second place where power lives in the chart is in the gate 34. So the gate 34 is on the top point, left-hand side of the sacral center, okay? So that gate 34 is called the gate of power. It is literally the most powerful gate in the body graph chart. That is connected to the sacral, which when used correctly is a sustainable source of energy, right? That sacral is the ever-ready bunny. It keeps going and going and going when it's responding, right? But when we look at, well, what does the sacral respond to? We say the sacral center is the center for work and sex, right? And we always get stuck on the sex thing, and we forget that the sex of the sacral center is not really just about the act of having sex. The sex of the sacral center is about sexuality, which means anything related to actually having sex, seduction, having babies, raising babies, having families. The entire arc of life comes under the heading of sexuality. Right? And so when we go back and we look at the sacral center and we talk about the sacral response to opportunities for work and sex, what we're really saying is that the sacral is designed to respond to the arc of life. And the work that it responds to is the work that sparks it so that it can stay sustainable, so that it has availability to take care of all of those things that fall under the arc of life, right? And so the 34, which is a responsive gate, is designed to respond in a very creative, expansive, multitasking kind of a way, in a learning kind of way, because it's always learning, how can I do this better, faster, more productively, right? 34 is designed to respond to, what do I need to do? How can I optimize how I'm creating in such a way that I can create more resources for the people I love, for my family, for that arc of life, right? That's the definition of power in the 34. It does not involve seizing, taking, usurping, stealing, unless you're living in a mindset of lack or not enough, which is related to the will center, but it's also related to the emotional solar plexus, and in particular to the gate 55, which is the leading energy that comes in as we move into this new era that begins in 2027. And that 55 energy is all about faith. And the first place that it has faith is it has faith in sufficiency or enoughness. So when we have faith in our own enoughness and we trust that we'll be provided for, right? Then we are capable, we program ourselves to respond to opportunities that are for the greater good of the whole. And we don't worry about, am I getting my fair share? Or What am I going to do to protect my people? Because those are the energies that lead to war. Those are the energies that lead to combat. Those are the energies that lead to the low expression of power. So power, to a certain degree, has a spiritual component to it. And power is rooted primarily in faith. And it's faith in enoughness. And oftentimes it's faith that has to transcend the obvious external circumstances that can feel very lackful and drop into the internal resources, time, energy, money, information, connection to source, and draw on those inner resources as the source of our power. And when we do that, then we be powerful, right? Then we can be in that G center. We can occupy an information field on a quantum level that is the embodiment of our sufficiency, our being provided for, our faith, our value, our sustainability, and our capacity to trust that we all do better when we all do better, that everyone thrives when we thrive, right? And that our first and most important thing that we have to do to become powerful and ultimately empower the world around us is to drop into an identity, a story that includes our authentic self. And I'm going to say that, I'm going to come back to this in a second, but let's talk about our authentic self for a minute. Why is it so powerful? Let's think about it just strictly in the context of energy, and we'll look at it mechanically. Right? If you have an engine that is designed to function a certain way, right? And it has, let's say on one of the gears, there's a tooth missing, right? And so it's still able to kind of spin, but it's not spinning very effectively, right? Because the gears aren't really connecting 100%, right? And let's say it doesn't have like enough fuel in it. So it's like spitting and gurgling a little bit. That's what your energy field looks like when you're not living true to yourself, right? Your system, which is designed to run powerfully and effectively and sufficiently and from a place of profound vitality and at a high frequency level, your system doesn't run when you're not synced up and lined up with who you're designed to be, right? So if you're trying to operate your system and you're trying to be something you're not, it's like your gears aren't working. You still might be spinning the little rubber thingies, right? But you might be out of fuel. You might be spitting and coughing. You might have to jigger a little bit to the left to try to get the whole thing to move because you're not operating effectively and efficiently. So we have energy and power, because energy is power, when we are authentic, right? That's the G center, when we're being the people we were designed to be. That energy is a high frequency state, right? It's a high frequency state. It's moving, functioning perfectly. It's spitting out consistent, sustainable energy. It's operating in a high level. It's a high frequency state. And again, going back to the physics classes we took in high school, we know from physics, straight up physics, this isn't quantum physics, from straight up physics that high frequency energies entrain lower frequency energies, right? So high frequencies bring up lower frequencies. The opposite is impossible. Low frequency energies cannot pull high frequency energies down. So when we talk about power being, being able to hold your vibration no matter what's going on around you, that's you staying in a high, choosing in that space between stimulus and response, choosing to stay in a high frequency state. And here's the kicker. Not only are you living at a higher state of wellness, consequently, in that space between stimulus and response, and now you're able to consciously choose, intentionally choose what it is that you want in that space between stimulus and response, but you're also influential. You're also the source of power in the room or the grocery store or wherever you are. When you walk into the PTA meeting, right, and you're in this high vibe, deeply aligned, energetic state, your very presence shifts the room. And whether you are aware of it or not, people feel you, they sense you, they notice you, they're moved by you. And you become the person who influences the room. That's power. And that's the power that feeds that powerful channel of coming off the G center, the 731. It's the power of authentic alignment. And it's contagious, right? It's a contagious form of power, because when you live in that power, everyone else around you is lifted up. And now they're holding that vibe. And they're able to bring themselves back into alignment. This is how sound healing works, right? We are retuned to a resonant state by frequencies of sound, right? You become the tuning mechanism when you live in that high vibrational state, and it becomes contagious, and it becomes influential, and it creates openings in the people around you to create more authentically and more in alignment with the human story, the full potential of the human story from its highest perspective. So, staying and taking back control over that space between stimulus and response is a process. This is what the goal of deconditioning is about. It's about getting back in there and learning how to take back control over that space. And when we talk about human design and the phases of human design, when we talk about the prescriptive phase of traditional human design, the very first thing we have to do to get back control over that space is to get back connected with our bodies, to drop into the authority for our design, our unique design. And it's going to be different for each and every one of you based on your chart. Your authority is going to tell you a lot about what do you need to do, how do you need to feel, how do you need to sense in your body what is right and not right for you. Because we often forget that in the process of becoming disempowered and conditioned in the world. Part of what we have to do oftentimes is just disconnect from the body, because our bodies are usually screaming, right? Our bodies are telling us, don't do that, don't do that, do that. And our head is like, wait a minute, what are you so upset about, body? I know that this is a good decision and it's going to take me exactly where I need to go. And the whole time the body's being dragged behind the brain, the mind, right? And eventually we have to either numb the body out completely, right? Or the body starts screaming loud enough that we can't ignore it anymore, and we have to go back and heal that disconnect and get back in touch with the body and learn to trust it, learn to trust its response, and let that visceral, physical inner compass that is your connection to your heart lead the way. So next week in the masterclass series, I'm going to be talking about authority and the body, and what does it feel like in the body to connect with the different authorities? What does it feel like in your body based on your chart? How do you get reconnected back to that visceral source of power that begins the journey that supports you in taking back control over the space between stimulus and response? So again, I'll post below the link to the 5-day masterclass series. I wish I could talk more about it. I could sit here and talk about this forever, but I hope you've gotten at least a little bit of a flavor of what we're going to be discussing and why understanding your human design, whether you're new to human design, okay, or whether you're here for a refresher. I want you to come and get a refresher, if you need to, on what does it feel like in my body when things feel right and wrong, because that is going to be the secret sauce, the secret source of your power. And again, in a time that feels massively disruptive, in a time when we feel really uncertain and confused about, well, what do I do, or what is mine to do in a time that feels so uncertain, your body and your inner authority has the answer to those questions. And you have to know how to trust that connection in order to be able to stand in your power and feel free to express yourself as the person you were born to be, as a person who absolutely has the capacity to engineer and midwife a future for this world that is really worthy of the human story and worthy of our kids and our grandkids and their kids and grandkids and their kids and grandkids. So thank you for joining me. Stay tuned here in our Quantum Human Design group. We got a lot of cool stuff going on in the next week leading up to the Masterclass series. As I said, be sure to register. I'll see you all next week for Transit Tuesday. Have a great weekend.